"You don't know how much I need such a friend," she said. "My aunt is full of copybook axioms, but I always feel that to live up to them would include wearing book muslin with gigot sleeves. And the other women, my best friends, well, they use me or abuse me, but they don't care a straw what happens to me. I've been about too long. People are getting tired of me. They're beginning to say I ought to marry." There was a moment's pause. Selden asked the simple question, "Well, why don't you?" She colored and laughed. "Ah, I see you are a friend after all, and that is one of the disagreeable things I was asking for." "It wasn't meant to be disagreeable," he returned amicably. "Isn't marriage your vocation? Isn't it what you're all brought up for?" She sighed. "I suppose so. What else is there?" "Exactly. And why not take the plunge and have it over?" She shrugged her shoulders. "You speak as if I ought to marry the first man that comes along." "I didn't mean that you're as hard put to it as that, but there must be someone with the requisite qualifications." She shook her head wearily. "I threw away 1 or 2 good chances when I first came out. I suppose every girl does. And you know I'm horribly poor and very expensive. I must have a great deal of money." Selden had turned to reach for a cigarette box on the mantelpiece. "What's become of Dilworth?" he asked. "Oh, his mother was frightened. She was afraid I should have all the family jewels reset. And she wanted me to promise that I wouldn't do over the drawing room." "The very thing you're marrying for." "Exactly. So she had him packed off to India. Hard luck. But you can do better than Dilworth." He offered the box, and she took out 3 or 4 cigarettes, putting one between her lips and slipping the others into a little gold case. "Have I time?" "Just a whiff, then." She leaned forward, holding the tip of her cigarette to his. As she did so, he noted how evenly the black lashes were set in her smooth white lids, and how the purplish shade beneath them melted into the pure pallor of her cheek.
Lily saunters about, inspecting Selden's library. She queries him on Americana, particularly on Jefferson Gryce's collection. Then she asks a more personal question.
"Don't you ever mind," she said suddenly, "not being rich enough to buy all the books you want?" He followed her glance about the room with its worn furniture and shabby walls. "Don't I just? Do you take me for a saint? And having to work, do you mind that?" "Oh, the work itself is not so bad. I'm rather fond of the law." "No, but the being tied down, the routine. Don't you ever want to get away, see new places and people?" "Horribly, especially when I see all my friends rushing to the steamer." She drew a sympathetic breath. "But do you mind enough to marry, to get out of it?" Selden broke into a laugh. "God forbid," he declared. She rose with a sigh, tossing her cigarette into the grate. "Ah, there's the difference. A girl must, a man may, if he chooses." She surveyed him critically. "Your coat's a little shabby, but who cares? It doesn't keep people from asking you to dine. If I were shabby, no one would have me. The woman is asked out as much for clothes as for herself. The clothes are the background, the frame. They don't make success, but they're part of it. Who wants a dingy woman? We're expected to be pretty and well-dressed till we drop. And if we can't keep it up alone, we have to go into partnership." Selden glanced at her with amusement. It was impossible, even with her lovely eyes imploring him, to take a sentimental view of her case. "Oh, well, there must be plenty of capital on the lookout for such an investment. Perhaps you'll meet your fate tonight at the Trinners." She returned his look interrogatively. "I thought you might be going there." "Oh, not in that capacity, but there are a lot of your set. Gwyn Van Osberg, the Wetheralls, and the George Dorsets." She paused a moment before the last name and shot a query through her lashes, but he remained imperturbable. "Mrs. Trinner asked me, but I can't get away. And those big parties bore me." "Ah, so they do me," she exclaimed. "Then why go?" "It's part of the business. You forget. Besides, if I didn't, I should be playing bezique with my aunt at Richfield Springs." "That's almost as bad as marrying Dilworth," he agreed. They both laughed for pure pleasure in their sudden intimacy. She glanced at the clock. "Dear me, I must be off. It's after 5.
Lily leaves Selden's apartment, unobserved except by a woman scrubbing the stairs. But as she looks for a hansom cab, she sees an acquaintance.
Miss Bart? Well, of all people, this is luck, he declared, and she caught a twinkle of amused curiosity between his screwed-up lids. Oh, Mr. Rosedale, how are you? She said, perceiving that the irrepressible annoyance on her face was reflected in the sudden intimacy of his smile. Mr. Rosedale stood scanning her with interest and approval. He was a plump, rosy man of the blonde Jewish type, with smart London clothes fitting him like upholstery, and small, sidelong eyes which gave him the air of appraising people as if they were bric-a-brac. Been up to town for a little shopping, I suppose, he said, in a tone which had the familiarity of a touch. Miss Bart shrank from it slightly, and then flung herself into precipitate explanations. Yes, I came up to see my dressmaker. I'm just on my way to catch the train to the Trinners. Ah, you're a dressmaker, just so, he said blandly. I didn't know there were any dressmakers in the Benedict. Is that the name of this building? Yes, that's the name. I happen to own the building. That's why I know. His smile deepened as he added with increasing assurance. But you must let me take you to the station. The Trinners are at Belmont, of course. You've barely time to catch the 5:40. The dressmaker kept you waiting, I suppose. Lily stiffened under the pleasantry. Oh, thanks, she stammered, and at the moment her eye caught a hansom and she hailed it with a desperate gesture. You're very kind, but I couldn't think of troubling you, she said, extending her hand to Mr. Rosedale. Heedless of his protestations, she sprang into the rescuing vehicle.
Chapter 2. As Lily takes her seat on the train, she notices a blonde young man at the other end of the car.
Lily's eye brightened. She had known that Mr. Percy Gryce was to be at Belmont, but yet she had not counted on the luck of having him to herself in the train, and the fact banished all perturbing thoughts of Mr. Rosedale. She began to cut the pages of a novel, tranquilly studying her prey through downcast lashes while she organized a method of attack. Something in his attitude of conscious absorption told her that he was aware of her presence. No one had ever been quite so engrossed in an evening paper. She guessed that he was too shy to come up to her, and that she would have to devise some means of approach which should not appear to be in advance. It amused her to think that anyone as rich as Mr. Percy Gryce should be shy, but his timidity might serve her purpose better than too much assurance. She had the art of giving self-confidence to the embarrassed, but she was not equally sure of being able to embarrass the self-confident. She waited till the train was racing between the northern suburbs. As it lowered its speed near Yonkers, she rose and drifted down the carriage. As she passed Mr. Gryce, the train gave a lurch, and he was aware of a slender hand gripping the back of his chair. He rose with a start, his ingenuous face looking as though it had been dipped in crimson. Even the reddish tint in his beard seemed to deepen. The train swayed again, almost flinging Miss Bart into his arms. She steadied herself with a laugh and drew back, but he was enveloped in touch. Oh, Mr. Gryce, is it you? I'm so sorry. I was trying to find the porter and get some tea. She held out her hand as the train resumed its level rush, and they stood exchanging a few words. Yes, he was going to Belmont. He had heard that she was to be of the party. He blushed again as he admitted it. And was he to be there for a whole week? How delightful! At this point, two belated passengers forced their way into the carriage, and Lily had to retreat to her seat. The chair next to mine is empty. Do take it, she said over her shoulder, and Mr. Gryce, with considerable embarrassment, succeeded in transporting himself and his bags to her side. Ah, and here's the porter. Perhaps we can have some tea. She signaled. Then a moment, with the ease that had seemed to attend the fulfillment of all her wishes, a little table had been set up between the seat.